All right, so just like we were doing a little while ago, I'm going to CD and I'm not going to put anything, which is if I do a PWD, you'll notice it puts me back in our home directory. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to pretend we're going to do what we did in the previous video. So I'm going to CD space and I'm going to tell it to go to the root directory. So remember when we were doing our little boxes a while ago, we were looking at the desks. So this is basically telling it to go to the desk. And then at this point, I'm going to do an ls, and you'll notice there's a whole lot of files, a whole lot of folders here, or a whole lot of boxes. And what we were talking about in the video is we had a box that we were going to call Raspberry Pi stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a directory. So we're going to type mkdir for make directory, and we're going to give it a name, and we're going to say Raspberry Pi stuff. Now you'll notice a couple things. I didn't put any spaces in here, primarily because when you start putting spaces in directory names and stuff, it'll work, but it gets kind of difficult because you start having to put quotes around things in it. And so I generally try to keep my directories with all lowercase letters and all together. Normally I wouldn't even create a folder this big. I'm just trying to make this video mimic what we were doing earlier. So we're just going to make a directory for that. And actually I'm going to do this. Don't worry about what I'm doing right now. I'll explain this later. But we're gonna, let's make sure we're still in root. So we're gonna make dir Raspberry Pi stuff. And we're gonna make another box called lens, I think is what we had. And then we had another one called just Raspberry Pi boards, I think was the other one. Okay, so now if we do an ls, you can see that we have Raspberry Pi boards, Raspberry Pi stuff, and then we have one over here called lens. And in our first example, that's what we were using. So I'm going to cd into lens, and we're going to touch a file in here called mylens.txt. And all the txt is doing is telling it that it's a text file. So now we're going to get out of here, or let's do an ls. You can see that we have our lens inside of this box. So now let's go to Raspberry Pi boards, and you'll notice nothing's in here, but I'm going to touch one called board1.txt, and we'll touch board2, because you remember we had quite a few of those little things. So we're going to say board3.txt, and finally we'll do board4.txt. And so now if we do an ls, you can see that we have 4 boards inside of our folder or our box called Raspberry Pi boards. So now we're going to get out of there, and finally let's go into Raspberry Pi stuff, which was the big white box that we had over there. Again, nothing in here at the moment. So we're going to touch, we'll just say miscellaneous1.txt, touch miscellaneous2.txt, touch miscellaneous3.txt, ls, and you can see that we have some files in here now. So if we back up and look, we have our main boxes, our main folders that we have in the root directory. And so now what we did in our example is we moved, so we're going to type mv to move our Raspberry Pi boards. So we're going to move this whole folder into the box called Raspberry Pi stuff. And so I'm moving my boards directory, my boards box, and I'm placing it inside of that clear box that we had on the desk. So now we're going to do that, and we're going to do an ls, and you'll notice that Raspberry Pi boards is gone. So let's take a look at our Raspberry Pi stuff folder, and you'll notice if I do an al, you'll notice that we have our folder in here called Raspberry Pi boards inside of our folder that we had created called Raspberry Pi stuff. And so using files and folders, we're able to organize everything exactly like we want to have it. So no matter where you end up creating, notice here I'm going to do a cd space ... That represents the parent folder. It's basically saying go backwards one directory. So if I do that, you'll notice that now we're in the root folder again. So I'll do that one more time. We'll Raspberry Pi stuff. You'll notice pwd, we're in root, and then we're inside of the big box called Raspberry Pi stuff. And then if I type cd ... again, we're back here. Now there is another thing that we can do. We can also type cd/ to just tell it straight up go back to the root folder, and that does the same thing. So either one of those will back us up to the directory that we want to have. So now if we do an ls, we also want to move, we were going to put the lens box inside of that stuff instead of Raspberry Pi stuff as well. So we'll move that box in there. And so now if we do an ls, you can see that we only have our Raspberry Pi stuff folder now. The Raspberry Pi boards is gone and the lenses are gone. And so if we go into Raspberry Pi stuff and do an ls, you can see now we have the lens folder here, we have Raspberry Pi boards over here, and then if we go again and say cd into Raspberry Pi boards, notice our directory that we're in. When we do our pwd, it's telling you that we're in the root folder, we're in Raspberry Pi stuff, and then we're in another box called Raspberry Pi boards. And so now if I do an ls in here, there's our boards. So we'll cd back one folder. Now here's an interesting thing to pay attention to. So right now we are in the root folder, Raspberry Pi stuff, and then another box called Raspberry Pi boards. So if I type cd space ... right now, it's going to tell it to go back to the parent, which is the Raspberry Pi stuff. So watch what happens. So cd ... enter, and now we'll do a pwd for print working directory. And notice now we didn't go back to root like we did last time. Now we only went back one directory. So now we're back in Raspberry Pi stuff. So if I do an ls, here's our directory, here's our lens, and here's our miscellaneous files that we created, but we stayed inside of there. Now let's do the other command that we did. So remember the other one, right now we're in Raspberry Pi stuff, Raspberry boards, but watch what happens when I type cd space /. So now I'm not telling it to back up to the parent directory. I'm giving it an explicit directory to go to, which is root. So I'm telling it to go back to the desk. And so now we go here, pwd, and notice now we went all the way back to the root folder. So the cd command combined with these directories that we're creating allows us to organize all of the files that we have on the hard drive so that we can keep things in a way that we can actually find them later. And so the final thing that we're going to do is we're going to cd, well, we're already back here at our root folder. So if I do an ls, you'll notice this Raspberry Pi stuff folder that we have. I'm going to get rid of that folder by typing remove rm space -r, and the -r tells it to remove directories. When I tells it to remove it recursively, so it's going to dig into that directory and delete everything down inside that directory. If I only do an rm here, so let's say remove Raspberry Pi, I'm going to get an error because it's telling me that that is a directory, and you can't remove a directory with only rm. So we'll do an rm -r, and then we'll remove the Raspberry Pi stuff folder. And now if I do an ls, you'll notice that folder is gone.